All right, what else do we have? We got a couple of more giveaways we're going to do, but we are kind of, I mean, we'll go as long as Gregory's battery and his stamina last. I'm a night owl, so I do this all night. But what do we have for us?
Here's a good one. It's not really biblical, it's theological, but I think it's interesting. I've been asked this questions by atheists. If God is good and ethnic cleansing is evil, why would he allow ethnic cleansing against the Amalekites? Does that make God not all good?
Yeah. Great question. It presumes a lot of things. I'm going to point you to a video first. I just last week had Dr. Helen Painter on. She runs the Center for the Study of Bible and Violence over in Bristol, England. She's a renowned scholar, biblical scholar. We had a great discussion. I pulled a clip from our full discussion, which was a theology of biblical violence. And I pulled a clip specifically, does the Bible teach genocide? You can catch it on the channel, bright red background. Can't miss it, where we specifically talked about those passages. The question presumes that God commanded ethnic cleansing, and that's based on how people are reading the accounts in Joshua, Deuteronomy, these orders that are given. If you read them there's translation choices that are made, and we talk about this in the video, so there's more that can be said about this. And I have other videos on this channel where we've talked about it. Let me just give you the nutshell. The passages that talk about wipe them out entirely, I would argue, Helen would argue, others have argued, they are not literally saying wipe them out the way we think of it. They're using hyperbolic language. And we know this because there's a specific passage. Let me pull it up in Joshua. And I want to say, if I can find it off the cuff, I want to say it's Joshua. We specifically talk about it in the video, but let's see. Joshua 10:20. Joshua 10:20 says this, and this is very interesting. So Joshua and the Israelites destroyed them completely, almost to a man. This is the NIV. So first half of the verse, it uses the word for destroy completely, wipe out, like exterminate. Second half of the verse says, but the few who were left reached their fortified cities. So the first half of the verse said they wiped them out. The second half of the verse said, now the remainers, the ones who weren't wiped out. So that's just one example, but you see this at the big picture in Joshua and Judges. Joshua, the book, if you read it, it seems like Joshua took the whole land. It even says not one of the promises that God gave to Israel remained unfulfilled. They took all of the land all at once. It makes a big deal about them doing this. Then you literally turn the page from Joshua to Judges. And Judges, the very beginning of the book, talks about, now, Israel didn't drive out everybody, and those who remained were a thorn in Israel's side, and they led Israel astray, and Israel would turn after the other gods. So you have these two accounts, and the biblical authors put them side by side without contradiction. And so different interpreters have handled this differently. From my own perspective, I think what's going on is Joshua is giving the theological military, like similar, not completely exactly, but similar to how when we would talk about a sports team and we would say, oh, that team crushed the other team, or, oh man, I live in Charlotte. Oh, the Panthers got destroyed on Sunday, right? Well, I don't mean it literally. I mean, they got beat really bad. Well, ancient war accounts frequently use that same approach. Kings would talk about, I utterly exterminated, or I wiped out, or and even the language would be man and woman, young and old. it would use this hyperbolic, even the animals. And then in the next section, it would talk about, it would presume that there were still people that remained, that it hadn't been ever. So it's kind of, like in the Bible, all doesn't always mean all. And particularly when you come to those accounts. So did God command the ethnic cleansing? Helen has made the argument in her book. Helen's, I can't reach it. It would be too far for me to go. Helen's book, Blessed Are the Peacemakers, she deals with the Amalekites in particular, and that what God had commanded the Israelites to do that they failed to do, and even Saul failed to do it, was to not wipe out the Amalekites as a people, but to wipe them out as a force. In other words, to destroy them, how would we say it? Like to crush the head of the serpent, so to speak, like take out. And that's why the king that was killed was King Agag when he was hacked to death by Samuel. That was the wiping out of the Amalekites, was crushing the head of their king, like beating them just so that they couldn't be an entity that remained in the land to lead Israel astray. It's a nuanced argument, and it's more than we could do in a Q&A here, but we've done a lot on this subject here in the dojo. So we've addressed this in our Deuteronomy podcast and video teaching series here on the channel. We've addressed it in the Joshua series. We've addressed it in the Judges series at the beginning. And we've also talked about it in the discussion I had last week with Helen. So it's not a quick thing. If you read the text as a flat literal reading, then it's going to seem like, it seems like God's commanding this. There are good biblical reasons for going, wait a minute, I think something else is going on here, because you have these peoples that are so-called destroyed or utterly wiped out or annihilated. And then later in that same book, you have those people still around. So what's going on? And a lot of it comes down to translation issues. I'll mention
while you're pulling it up, JM, let me add a tiny bit of perspective as well. Be careful in this topic importing a 21st or 20th century perspective on what you're referring to as ethnic cleansing. Keep in mind, today we have the concept of ethnicity and, DNA, and, we're going to get all of the, whoever, pick your favorite DNA group or, category or ethnicity. Yeah. That's not the way they looked at it then. A lot of you see this very clearly in Exodus when the children of Israel were leaving Egypt. And it said very clearly it was a mixed multitude that left. And then immediately afterwards, you hear them saying, I think it was Aaron married an African lady, someone else married an Egyptian, and they were all called the children of Israel. So It wasn't something as simple as what's their ethnicity and, who was their father and mother. The way this was measured is oftentimes by ritual practice. So in the case of the children of Israel, in Egypt specifically, whoever did that Passover act and put the blood over the doorpost, children of Israel. I don't care if you're from Egypt, Jerusalem, Ethiopia, you're children of Israel. Full stop. Why? Because ritually, you did the ritual practice that was called Passover. So that's the way they're judging it there. So you could eliminate an entire quote unquote tribe of Amalekites by by dealing with just the ones that were doing that ritual practice that, God was against. So, it could be children sacrifice, could be human sacrifice, could be whatever it was. So you could target that just by doing it against the people that were there. And that would have gotten rid of quote unquote all of the Amalekites. But I'm gonna shut up now.
Yeah, and to add to that, we have a clear biblical example. Deuteronomy says you will not allow, and it gives the list of the Canaanites and the peoples that Israel was going to dispossess, and it said these are not allowed into the assembly of the people to the either 5th or 10th generation. And Moabites was one of them. Moabites are not to be allowed into the assembly. So that's like seemingly this ethnic-based command. The book of Ruth. You have an entire book. David's great grandmother was Ruth the Moabite. So clearly it's not, there's something else going on. I tell people there are exceptions. And so when it comes to, again, we have to, like Gregory said, the modern concept of ethnic cleansing is not an exact equivalent of what was going on in Israel at the time. And scholars have made the case that it was much more based on your covenant relationship, not your language or heritage or genetics or anything like that. There's more. Let me just two resources. One by my friend Charlie Trim. Charlie's written a book, very short book called The Destruction of the Canaanites, God, Genocide, and Biblical Interpretation. It's not a thick book. Charlie does not tell you what view he holds. He analyzes the different views that biblical scholars hold, the strengths and the weaknesses of each. So this is a quick primer, and it's helpful because you do not know what Charlie believes after you're reading this. A book that I've found especially helpful is this book by William Webb and Gordon Ost, and it's called Bloody, Brutal, and Barbaric: Wrestling with Troubling War Texts. This one is more in-depth, it's more scholarly, but they make the case and argue and demonstrate a lot of the stuff that I mentioned in more detail. Why the battle accounts are hyperbolic and not literal. Clues from the text itself that what's going on is not this surface level reading, and then it's issues of genre and issues of biblical context and background and everything. So definitely this is probably this I would argue personally is the best book on this subject that I have come across, but it presumes that you have an understanding of the situation so far. Like if you've never studied this issue, I wouldn't say jump in and read this. But if you have wrestled with these texts and you're looking and you're a viewer of this channel, this is where I would point people. So those are two I think that would help. Let's do another giveaway.